I'm sure a chunk of you have seen videos like that, or have at least heard of this thing called Agartha. If you haven't heard of it, that's okay. I'll give you the gist here in a little bit. But today I'm going to be ranking it and seeing how it stacks up against the other theories I have ranked. First, let's just go over what exactly Agartha is. Agartha is a continent slash kingdom slash country slash civilization inside the Earth. It's not just underground, but the Earth is hollow. And if you dig deep enough, you can pop out on the other side, and you'll be in the hollow Earth. And this hollow Earth is called Agartha. Besides digging down deep enough, there's other ways to access Agartha. You can go to the North and South Pole, which both have little holes, well, giant holes that lead straight into Agartha. Okay, cool. So Agartha is inside the Earth, sure. But what else is going on down there? This is where you're going to get a lot of the variation in different theories and different ideas. Some people think it's aliens, maybe lizards, but the most popular version right now is that living beneath the Earth is just about any famous or infamous person you can think of, and they're living with technology from hundreds of years into the future, and are immortal? It's not super clear what the deal is with these people, but there are people in there who should have been dead a long time ago. I think you've got the general idea, so let's talk about its history. Agartha is mostly credited as coming from a French writer, barrister, judge, lecturer guy named Louis Jacoliot. My French is going to be rough. There are a lot of French names, and it's really bad. In 1883, he wrote a book called, get ready, Le Fils de Dieu. French is going to be rough, which it means the sons of God. Agartha here was called Asgartha, which was said to be an ancient capital of India over 15,000 years ago. An important thing we need to cover is this idea during the Victorian era, this 1880s time. Victorian euhumorism. It's the idea that all of the myths and stories in like Greek mythology or Roman mythology, they all have strong historical ties. And so you look back in time and like Zeus was an ancient king, or like Hades was an ancient king, and they've just been deified by history and the repeated telling of stories. And so this guy, Jacoliot, really believed in this idea, and when he heard about Agartha, when he got his hands on, somehow he had access to these, like a list of myths and like stories from ancient India, he was like, whoa, this stuff is real. And so he wrote a book about it, and that's where you get this book, The Sons of God. And in it, he includes Asgartha. It's not very similar to most other Indian myths. It's a lot closer to being described kind of like as like Asgard in Norse mythology. And this ties in pretty well. Supposedly, in 5000 BC, the city of Asgartha was destroyed, and the people who destroyed it were driven out by the Brahmins, the priest class in India, the like ancient Brahmins. And those people who destroyed Agartha were driven out. They were driven north, and then settled down in Scandinavia and became like Vikings and stuff. The next time we hear about Agartha in history is this French philosopher and a political science fiction writer. It's another French name, bear with me. Joseph Alexandre Saint-Yves Marquis d'Avdre. I don't know, bro. It was very Spanish. I don't know French. He wrote a story in 1885 called, get ready, Mission de l'Inde en Europe, Mission de l'Europe en Asia. I don't know, bro. Or in, like, the way normal people speak in English, in Freedom. The Kingdom of Agartha, A Journey into the Hollow Earth. I don't know how he got Agartha from the translation. He wrote this book after taking Sanskrit lessons from a guy named Harjeesh Sharif. Dude, these names are gonna kill me. Who signed on each piece of paper they used that he was of the great Agarthian school. And Saint Yves, as we'll call him, this French guy, he asked him about what's this great Agarthian school? And Harjish told him about it. And then he wrote this book. And this book is about how he started astral projecting in his sleep, going to Agartha as like an astral projected soul, and talking to the people there, because they could also astral project. He learned there in his dreams, not dreams, astral projections, that Agarthans were incredibly technologically and socially advanced. They also happened to affirm all of his political ideas, and also agreeing with his political ideas were Moses and Jesus. So, actually in my story, I'm the hero, and everyone agrees with me and loves me, so I have to be right. After he wrote and published this book, 2 weeks later, he got super scared that he had said too much, and that the guy he was talking to, Harjish, or whoever helped supply him this information that he wrote about, used as his source, he was scared he had said too much. And so he went out, collected all the books, burned all but 2 of them. One was a copy for himself, and the other was a secret copy kept by the printer, who, after St. Eves died in 1909, the printer published the book in 1910. Just kind of a big middle finger to the St. Eves guy. Even after he burned all but 2 of them, and even after they were republished, nobody really cared or noticed that he had written anything. So the idea of Agartha kind of faded into the background a little bit while World War I was happening. Some German people talk about it. We'll talk about it in a second. But after World War I, this Polish writer, Ferdynand Ossendowski, that's an easier name, let's go, brought back the idea of Agartha in a big way. He wrote a book in 1922 called Beast, Men, and Gods, and he wrote an underground kingdom that had over 800 million people called Agharti. They have so many names for this imaginary place. I don't know why they can't just decide on one. The book talks about whatever, it's Agartha, under the ground, you get it. But at the end, it ends with this prophecy that in 2029, the inhabitants of Agharti will return to the surface. To be more specific, one of the guys who rules over Agharti, he was named the King of the World. He had predicted in 1890 there would be 50 years of strife and misery, followed by 71 years of great happiness under 3 great kingdoms, and then an 18-year war, and then the Agharti people would return. 2029 is still 3 years away, so we'll just have to wait and see. After the French had had their fun, some German occultists started poking around at Agartha, and so kind of after World War I and sort of towards the end, some German occultists began looking around for researching, trying to find Agartha. So this interest kind of builds and builds and builds until everyone's favorite point in history, everyone's favorite, World War II. I hope we're far enough in. Are we far enough in? In World War II, the Nazis picked up this idea. This is where we get the idea of blonde hair, blue eyes, white skin, Aryans living in Agartha. They just kind of stuck these guys in Agartha and are like, sure, yeah, they live there now. Supposedly, they were members of their like super race that they believed in, and were super technologically advanced, and were like on their side. Whatever, bro. You can't really speak to how widespread this idea was. It's kind of hard to find. But some members of the Nazi Party did certainly believe it. There were several expeditions to Antarctica, 1930s era time. Modern ideas will interpret these expeditions as the Nazis investigating and building up military bases and preparing to enter Agartha and investigate the Agarthan UFOs that were coming out of the South Pole. Some others will say that Nazis went into the hole and are now living forever down in Agartha, in the Hollow Earth. So maybe one of those infamous people that's alive down there is everyone's favorite mustache guy. The next major event for Agartha lore comes from this supposed lost journal from Admiral Richard E. Byrd, who from the from the 1930s to 1956 went on a whole bunch of expeditions to Antarctica. And on one of these missions, 1947, he supposedly flew down to the South Pole and got picked up by UFOs, met Agarthans and all this, like aliens and stuff, and then they sent him back. He also had a lot to do in like real history. A real thing that he did, Admiral Byrd, was he was very involved in Operation High Jump, which is what a lot of these theorists will cite as like, they're doing crazy stuff in Antarctica. But Operation High Jump was just looking in Antarctica for, could we be invaded from Antarctica as America? Because we were scared. It's the Cold War, start of the Cold War, end of World War II, whatever. Anyway, Admiral Byrd's secret journal was supposedly recorded in a book called, very aptly, Admiral Richard E. Byrd's Missing Diary, A Flight to the Land Beyond the North Pole into the Hollow Earth by Jeff Douglas. Those of you with a keen ear will notice that I said North Pole, but Admiral Byrd and everyone else went to Antarctica. I don't know what that's about. I think the title of the book is just wrong. Maybe it's because it was written in 2017. I don't know. And it has no connection to Admiral Byrd. I don't know. It's kind of upsetting because Admiral Byrd was actually a super cool guy in history. He is the only U.S. service member to ever wear 2 medals at the same time with his own face on it, which is pretty crazy. Nobody else could say that. That's kind of wild. After Byrd's most likely unwilling contribution, Agarthan lore and ideas kind of die out for a little bit, right up until about a year ago when these memes started showing up. These videos include this charming fellow, this charming fellow right here with a big head by the name of Yakub. I can't go into a ton of detail on who Yakub is. If you want to see me do a video on him, tell me in the comments. Please and thank you. But long story short, he's this black scientist in like ancient history who invented white people in a lab to punish black people who were mean to him. That's all you're gonna get out of me. Anyway, we're caught up to the modern day, so let's break down my ranking. And here we are with our ranking. So let's just start right off with our believability. Me personally, I give it a 3. If you ask me, the idea that the UFOs are coming out of inside of the Earth through the holes in the poles, it's kind of crazy. If you start trying to talk to me then about Nazi scientists, I'm getting out of there as soon as possible. It's not completely insane though, and could technically be possible, but it's kind of ridiculous, so I give it a 3. For evidence, Agartha gets a 2. Every document that I could find that referenced a source of where Agartha came from said that it was attributed to an occultist writer, or the dude in 2017. So it doesn't seem like there's any evidence. There's the cool stuff from like the 1890s and stuff like that. St. Eve's work and Jacques Elliott's work, Jacques Elliot, whatever, his work, they seem pretty neat, but not a ton of evidence. Community gets a 0. So while this idea has been kind of brought back in modern media, it's still very closely tied to Nazis, which is bad. Hot take. The black sun symbol, I'm not going to show it here, but you can look it up. The black sun symbol came from the idea of Agartha. But, you know, I'm not calling every person who believes in Agartha a Nazi. It's not what I'm saying. But that Venn diagram is pretty close to a circle. Consequence is going to get a 1. Agartha was used kind of in World War II as like a propaganda tool of, look how great we are, we're so technologically advanced and living in the South Pole. Even if it wasn't super widespread, people believed it made them bigger Nazis, which is probably a bad thing. If you've seen the Agartha edits at all since a year ago, year and a half ago, whatever. You've seen also videos of people in like high school or college or elementary school or whatever, not elementary school, but in school ranking like which of their teachers would make it into Agartha, and it just ends up discriminating against Jewish people, which is kind of cringe. I don't like discrimination. Sorry to go woke, but woke is cool now, so they get a 1. If true is gonna get a 2 here. If Agartha is real, it means either in 2029 we'll get people from Agartha coming back up from the middle of the earth, or they're hyper technologically advanced Nazis, which is kind of like, you know, aren't really great options. It gets a 2, and it completely shatters our worldview on the Earth if it's hollow and there's like an artificial sun inside it. Now I'm gonna be a little bit of a hypocrite here, but I think comedy gets a 9. I think it's really funny. I laughed at the videos a lot. I sent them to my friends and everything. I also really enjoyed the research for this video. It was so funny reading how crazy and how deep this rabbit hole gets, which is super funny. But the only reason it's not a 10 is because Nazis, and it aged poorly. So, rest in peace. But with that, we have our final score for Agartha of 265, which is a lot lower than Flatter. I think it's kind of a burnt sienna-ish color, which is probably too good for it. Anyway, alright everyone, I hope you learned something, or enjoyed the video, or maybe just won, whatever. Bye.